Hello and welcome to this latest webinar from Moviesens. Today we're going to be talking a lot about interactive assessment and in particular sensor-triggered experience sampling and ecological momentary assessment. So utilizing our physiological sensors to detect changes in physiology or certain elements of physiological state and utilizing that to trigger a questionnaire to get more contextual data from a participant. So our topics for today. First, we're going to get to know Moviesens. We'll talk a little bit about our history and our expertise, and then we'll introduce our range of physiological sensors. And I'm hopeful that a lot of you already have some current experience using our experience sampling platform, movisensXS. We'll touch on that lightly, and if you need more information about it, then we can deal with that in the Q&A section. And then we're going to have a larger segment of sensor triggering and what it means, how to utilize it within movisensXS. And at the end, we'll close out with a Q&A session where at any point throughout the webinar, feel free to write into the chat window any questions whatsoever, and we can address them towards the end of the session today. Getting to know Moviesens. So Moviesense is a spin-off from the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology, from an interdisciplinary research group that was focusing on the relationship between stress, physical and mental performance. It was established in 2009 and our headquarters are still here in Karlsruhe, and we're up to 17 employees now. There are two branches, I guess. We have it represented here as a circle because we really do see an integrated whole when it comes to ambulatory assessment. So we provide a large range of solutions for multimodal ambulatory assessment. The idea is we want you guys being able to get out of the lab and do your research in the field in real life. So in order to do that, we need to gather elements of information, and on the left-hand side, we're dealing primarily with the objective data, so physical activity measured via our physical activity monitors and our different sensors. Also, in particular, the autonomic state. So a lot of researchers have a lot of questions about changes in the autonomic state and the context around them. So we have the ECG MOV4, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and that helps us understand cardiac parameters. In particular, the parameter of trend at the moment is heart rate variability, in particular RMSD, like high frequency RMSD. And also we can look at the sympathetic nervous system through our EDA monitor, so galvanic skin response. Now on the right hand side, we look at the subjective data, so gathering information directly from the participants about their feelings. So asking them questions to elicit responses and doing that in all sorts of different contexts, whether that be through random sampling throughout the day, assessing their actual use of their device. Unfortunately, everyone, we're becoming part man, part machine, and our mobile phones are becoming an integrated element of us, and that can also provide researchers a lot of insights into a person and their psychological, their mood, I guess we could say, and their behaviors. So context is probably where a lot of this links together, in the element of looking at different physical activities and then trying to get more contextual information from the participant about what's actually happening, or to isolate certain incidents. Now, at the bottom is synchronization, where we have excellent expertise in being able to take your physiological sensor data and then merge it with your experience sampling data, and to make it easier to work with and to sort of gain the insights that you need. And at the top is the interactive assessment, which is where we're really going to be delving deep today, in particular the sensor trigger functionality. So as I discussed, we have a range of products for ambulatory assessment and experience sampling. We are capable of developing mobile sensor systems. Some of the sensor systems that we have now have come out of researcher projects and requests. So if this is something where you see something that you like within our sensor range but just isn't quite a perfect fit, you can always get in touch with us. We have the expertise to customize and tinker with our sensors and release variations of them for your research projects. So why ambulatory assessment? I mean, I hope that if you're here, you can understand the reasoning behind doing ambulatory assessment and the many advantages. So the real-time assessment that increases accuracy and gets rid of the retrospective biases. The ambulatory element that brings it into the real-life capabilities of people, like the real-life experience that people are actually having, as opposed to a laboratory experience. So the multimodal assessment, it helps us integrate the psychological, the physiological, and the behavioral data. So we have like the broad range of different elements where we can really understand what's actually happening to a participant, both at a psychological or physiological level. Now, the Moviesense sensors. So the MOV4, the 3D accelerometer activity sensor, that forms the core of all of our sensor range. So all of the capabilities of the MOV4 are present within all of the other sensors. Hence, the MOV4 is always within the name of the sensor. So there's 3D accelerometer, 3D gyroscope, air pressure, proximal temperature. So not actually body temperature, but proximal temperature. So you can determine when people are wearing the sensor or when they've taken it off. And it's excellent for very long-term activity monitoring, up to multiple weeks, requiring very minimal charge times. And as I said, all of the sensors are capable of doing this, but this is the base model. This is what the core functionality is of all of the sensors. So it can do excellent energy expenditure calculations, sedentary time, sleep. A lot of different algorithms are available for processing secondary parameters. So the ECG MOV4 adds a single channel ECG at 1024 Hertz. So it's a really high level, high quality ECG where you can do long-term ambulatory measurements. So multiple days, multiple weeks, if you wanted to, can be stored on the ECG MOV4. It can be a little bit of a data burden, but that's another thing. That's a whole other thing we can guide you through if you are ambitious enough to do that sort of project. One of the big advantages with the ECG MOV4 is the design platform for all of the sensors is similar. So on the back, it just clips onto either one of our chest belts like this, which is very comfortable to wear for long-term measurements. I personally have done a 21-day measurement on myself, just swapping chest belts each day to have sort of a fresh, clean one after showering, and just continually putting the sensor back on after charging it for 5 to 10 minutes each day. And that worked perfectly. Or other alternative is you can actually use disposable electrodes, which are excellent for just very short-term measurements. If you're only going to measure for 24 hours or even 48 hours, using disposable electrodes can be more cost-effective. Then we move on to the EDA MOV4. So once again, all of those capabilities of the MOV4, but with an added channel of electrodermal activity, so at 32 Hertz. So where you can pick different locations. So there we're working with the knife edge of the hand in that image, which is actually a relatively good area to work. It sort of helps participants utilize their non-dominant hand a lot more without worrying about the electrode placement. You can also put it on the palm or on the wrist is possible. But it tends to interfere with the sensor positioning itself. And another really good location for longer term measurements, if you wanted to do multiple days, is on the instep of the foot. So not on the sole, but on the instep. And if that's something that interests you, please get in touch, and we can send you all sorts of wonderful diagrams on how to do that. And then, I guess, sort of our mid-range sensor, which is the light MOV4, which adds an element of ambient light detection. So 5 channels of light detection, so that you can. It's primarily for a lot of environmental detection work, understanding what lighting people are experiencing throughout their day. So a lot of architectural people are interested in this, hospital design, shift work, circadian rhythms. Those sort of elements come into play when you want to have the functionality of a physical activity tracker and also track those elements. This is an excellent solution. And now on to our experience sampling platform, MoviesenseXS. So, MoviesenseXS, a comprehensive solution for ambulatory assessment. And a lot of this is a little bit sort of going over the similar topics, but the reason the format is so important is that it increases the accuracy and reduces retrospective biases. So previously, pen and paper diaries were always notorious for being filled out retroactively towards the end of the study and not at the time when they were supposed to be filled out. So this allows us to investigate elements in real time as such and have it time-stamped and understand when people are filling it out. And we won't go too deep into it just now, but the flexible sampling strategies is something we'll feature soon. A large selection of item formats. We'll talk a little bit about these things. Easy setup and study design is definitely true. And it's a very secure platform. So only pseudonymous data is housed, and it's secure data transfer and hosting. So if a phone's lost, there's nothing that can kind of link the data on the phone back to that particular person. It's a pretty simple concept, as with most experience sampling platforms out there. It's got a web design platform where you can go in and actually create your forms and create your sampling schemas, enroll your participants, download your results, and all the other sort of administrative aspects of your study. And then the mobile app, which works on an Android smartphone at the moment. So we only have Android. I'll answer that straight away. Only Android at the moment, okay? And now into the exciting part, or I guess our main topic for today. So sensor triggering in MoviesenseXS. So using this lovely little MOV4 attached to the hip, what data that's sending, transmitting directly to this phone, and the sampling schema that's actually looking for certain patterns, detecting those patterns, and sending a questionnaire on the phone. So this is all about getting that context. It's all about capturing data at the time you want it to be captured and not after the fact. So if you're trying to analyze certain patterns of behavior, rather than randomly trying to prompt throughout the day and hope that you capture that behavior, the idea is that we're going to capture it a lot quicker. And we have this big advantage that you're capturing both the raw data on the sensor, plus the sensor is actually making calculations. So all of the sensors can trigger queries and interventions. So every sensor that we have has this capability. So as I was saying, we gather the raw data. It's being gathered on the sensor regardless. And every minute, or it's actually every 30 seconds with EDA, but every minute for every other value, it looks at certain aspects of the data that's collected, run some calculations, whatever calculations that particular sensor can run. So obviously an EDA sensor can't give you information on heart rate variability, and vice versa. That's obviously not possible. But once we get that batch of values, so by looking at that minute, it then transmits those values via Bluetooth Low Energy to the phone. Now, it's important to remember that there is a delay. We say it's real time, but it's real time not so much in a laboratory sense where it's millisecond precise, but more in the broader context of a longer ambulatory study where you're studying for multiple days or even multiple weeks. You're getting it down into the fraction of sort of minutes within the day or minutes after the event has occurred. So, which is a lot more precise than just doing 20 prompts randomly throughout the day and hoping one lands. And yeah, the final process is that information from here goes to the phone. The phone is where it looks at the sampling schema. So this is where the design of the sampling schema is important. That all happens on the phone in the background. It looks and takes all that information that it's just been sent and runs it through those calculations and to see if any conditions have been met to trigger a sensor-triggered questionnaire or intervention. And for those of you, I guess the 0.01% of you that really get into flowcharts and block diagrams. Like if there's any engineers hiding in the audience at the moment, this is the process here. So here is our participant. They're being measured. The signal is processing the data, sending situations over. movisensXS takes care of this element, so it takes that signal processing, looks at the condition, then runs the trigger to the form, and then the form gets uploaded into data storage. The form gets displayed obviously, and they fill in the questionnaire, and that also goes into the data storage. So I've just created a very basic study, like just now, on sensor trigger webinar, and it's based off of an example study, so that there's a little bit of information already populated for us that we can then sort of talk about quickly and then integrate our things that we want to do. Now, in the sampling schema, it's really important, if you want to do sensor triggering, that you get in touch with us, because we need to activate that for you. We need to activate the sensor blocks. So quite often you'll see, because mine has been enabled, we can see quite a lot of information here. In most people's accounts, it's less so. So you need to contact us, and it doesn't cost anything extra. It's just purely that we don't want people getting confused with all the extra information and thinking that they're going to pair a Fitbit or some other rubbish to this and have it all work and increase our support burden. So you email us, and after you've done that, it's really important that you come over here to this little wrench icon and go into the admin section and change the library we're using. On our documentation, we list 6158, library 6158 as the minimum for doing the sensor triggering. We're actually going to be working with 7096, which is also quite stable and has an extra function that we would really like everyone to implement if they're going to try and do sensor triggering. And I'll show you that function first up. Really, really important that you scroll down to this and hit Save Study. If you don't do that, then you'll come back to the sampling and wonder why you don't have any of the functionality that you're expecting. So, as I said, this is a sample study. Very simple, very basic. It's just running from throughout the week, and it's got a weekday format where there's getting random surveys. So, and you can see sort of a rough indication of what this means. So from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., there'll be 8 prompts at least half an hour apart, okay? And you can go in very simply edit these settings. It's very intuitive how to use this. And we have a very simple drag and drop setup, so we can just drag things onto the page and link them up by pulling between the two dots. And one thing I never noticed before, so for people who are colorblind, we have these lovely rounded edges on the top ones, and then we have rounded with square at the bottom for the yellow, and then for the green we have full squares. So you need to kind of link across that pattern for it to work, and it'll let you know if the sampling scheme is incorrect. And so, but by incorrect I mean that it's not connected up logically, that it could be understood. It still may not do what you want it to do. That's where you've got to be a bit more diligent yourself. So if we come over here now, and this is where we're going to be focusing most of our time now, on the sensor block. So we have a range here of existing sensor blocks, and the very first one I want to talk about is this particular one here, log sensor connection state. We really want everyone to put this block in, and you just link it up to the study running. You can put it anywhere on the page, just out of your way. What this does is it gathers the information and the connection state of any of the sensors you're coupling to the study, which when it comes to any sort of debugging issues or any dropout issues is going to be super helpful for us if that block is there, and it will allow us to actually, it'll give our developers and engineers some sort of information that they need to help remedy any problems, because we're supporting such a wide array of devices, so such a wide array of Android phones that can run this. Each one can bring its own particular problems and temperamental issues. So having this sort of information really helps us make sure that we can get your study back up and running as quickly as possible, or fix any errors. So all of these red conditions here represent different elements from the sensor. So the broadest one of all is the sensor value block. So we'll just drop it over here for now. When we go inside here, we can look at all of the different elements that the sensors will transmit. So battery level can be transmitted by absolutely every single sensor. So as can body position. Now, important to note, where the location of the sensor on the participant's body will be critical for allowing you to determine certain body positions. So you won't be able to determine seated or standing if it's on the chest, for instance. There's not enough information there. Or if it's on the wrist, you don't know if the person is sitting or standing. Whereas, say, on the thigh, you can determine that quite well, and on the hip to a lesser extent. So it's very important to be thoughtful about these things, and that's where we really implore you to get in touch with us. We're more than happy to help you in the design of this, and to make sure that you understand what the best solution is, because sometimes it could be multiple sensors depending on the environment, on what the question is. So have body position. Charging is one that seems a little bit trivial, but I'll show you a use case for that in a moment. EDA SCL mean obviously can only be used with the EDA sensor. Heart rate variability is valid, can also only be used with the ECG. MET can be used with the whole array of sensors, but is position dependent. Movement acceleration, the whole array of sensors. RMSD is strictly with the ECG MOV4, so that's a calculation of heart rate variability. So the root mean square of successive differences. Sensor temperature can be used with every sensor. However, skin temperature is something that comes from our specific model from the ECG infrared, where there's an infrared sensor on the back that actually is sampling the skin temperature, and you can work out an average of that over time. Steps can also be used with every sensor, but once again is a little position dependent. Actually, no, that's not true. It's quite good overall for the majority of positions that we recommend wearing the sensors. Now, this block is a very broad tool that can be used to really customize and tailor some things. So, for instance, if we are looking at making sure that one of the sensors is working properly, so if we want to determine that our ECG is actually transmitting a good signal, like it's actually capturing a good signal, we could look at that the heart rate variability is valid, and say we want to see when it's not capturing it, when something's not right with the sensor, we'll put an equal to false, and then we can set a time period. So if it's false for at least 20 minutes, and we can put that within a time block as well. So if we're studying throughout the day, for instance, so that they don't get alarms at night, we can simply go, we want a time range on this. We'll just try and make it all nice and beautiful. So between 8 and 8. So we don't want to disturb people when they're sleeping if their sensor has come off. Now, what about if they're charging the sensor or doing something else with the sensor that indicates that it won't actually be, that it's not likely that we'll be picking up this sort of data? We can also say, okay, we can link these and say, in this case, that charging is also false for at least 20 minutes. And what this gives us the power to say to people, okay, when these two events occur, so that the heart rate variability isn't valid, that means that something's not connected properly. Either they're not wearing the belt properly, or the electrodes come loose, or the sensor itself has come slightly unclipped, or they're just simply not wearing it, which definitely happens more than some people would like to admit. And then they're also not charging it at the same time. So if it's sitting on the charger being charged, then obviously it's not going to be collecting data. So and hopefully the participant realizes that. And then we could say, all right, at this point we want to send them some sort of warning, so we can immediately trigger some sort of alarm, and then we'd send them a form saying, please check your sensor connection. So on the form, you'd design a form on your forms page which would say, please check your ECG sensor. We're not getting proper data. Can you make sure it's properly configured? And maybe show them even a picture of how it should be worn, all in that context. And then that allows you to have some sort of reassurance when your study is running for a long period that the sensor is actually being worn properly. And you can even do this with movement acceleration, which I can show you in a sample study later. We can talk a little bit about how someone's using that in combination with movement acceleration to make sure that the sensor's being worn. Okay, through the magic of multiple windows, I've just jumped back over here and we've just got the time range block now. So you notice when it's red, it means that more things need to happen. If you try and save your sampling schema now, it'll just say, hang on, there are validation errors. So you need to then link it up to something else for it to happen. So in this case, we'll have a bit of a look at some of the other values, and we won't be so time range dependent. We know that that's an option for us, so that's not so important at the moment. Movement acceleration, obviously available with every single sensor and can be utilized as some sort of broad indicator of movement. So not super exciting, but once again, really handy in combination with other elements to make sure that the sensor is actually functioning and is being worn, and you can remind the participant to wear the sensor. There's also a disconnection one where it tells you that the sensor is disconnected from the phone, because I guarantee you people aren't going to forget their phone each day, but they may forget to put on their sensor. So when they walk out of range, the alarm comes, could you please go and check and put on your sensor, right? So EDA SCL steps is a custom designed algorithm for Sjoerd van Halen, who wrote a really excellent paper, and it was looking at triggering when an EDA SCL rise occurs, but also it factored in step count increase. So it was trying to reduce the amount of triggers that would occur based on activity, that were sort of false triggers, with activity playing a role in the SCL increase. And we're hoping to do a webinar soon which will detail this. We'll go into greater detail about this particular algorithm. Heart rate should be relatively obvious for everyone, and it's just a case of setting what particular threshold, and that will be specified at the start of the study so that you can somewhat customize it for each individual. It gives you that flexibility because everyone's heart rate, it will mean different things at different ages amongst your cohort and different levels of fitness. What heart rate should actually be triggering what. Sedentary behavior becoming a huge issue. So this is where it's very important that you're wearing the sensor on the thigh. If you have the sensor on the thigh and you're using sedentary, it's going to work the best, and you can set a minimum duration, and that will allow you to then either trigger a questionnaire, or you could trigger an intervention and get them to actually do some sort of movement to sort of break up their day. And moving over to the simple EDA SCL mean, that's really just looking at the SCL level. So it's a threshold value of change that occurs across EDA, so within the previous value. Now, EDA is calculated generally at a 30-second window because it's such a fast-acting, or relatively fast-acting, as opposed to RMSD, where you have to have a mass of data, like a minute or two of data, to actually notice relative changes that are meaningful. MET level, so metabolic equivalent of task. So this is very much an energy expenditure calculation. So it's looking to hit a certain level, a certain threshold, and then it will trigger a questionnaire. So, and that's customizable when you're starting the study. So the good thing is you can have also multiple ones of these. So each sensor can do certain things. So if you have a EDA sensor going on the arm, you can also be looking at movement acceleration. You can also be looking at different elements that all combine but are utilizing the one sensor, or you can use multiple sensors across the body. So these ones are really important. Sensor battery low is essential to have in every study, because then it can remind the participant to actually charge the sensor. And if they're wearing multiple sensors, it will show them which serial number is getting low, so that they know which one they need to charge as a priority. So for instance, the ECG and the EDA sensors tend to run lower quicker because they're gathering more data than the MOV4 and the light MOV4. Sensor disconnected we touched on before, and sensor stopped and sensor paused obviously lets you know when one of the sensors has stopped recording or is paused in the action of a recording. Now, there's a few more algorithms that have been custom developed for different people for different studies over time, and we're going to dig into those a little now. But first I want to show you what the sensor should be looking like when you're preparing to actually do a sensor coupled study. So we're just going to go over to the Moviesens Sensor Manager now, and we'll connect our sensor. I'm just going to connect a MOV4, and now the sensor's status is being read out, and what we're going to look at here is certain elements. So sensor MOV4, measurement parameters. These are all the different things it's going to be capturing in Hertz, but also it lets us know what things it's going to be transmitting via Bluetooth. So MET level, which is something else that was in the sensor value block, and there's a few other elements that will be coming through. Now, we do not want to start a recording. What we want to see is that the firmware version is at least 1.15.4, and that the sensor is, it has some reasonable charge on it. This is perfectly fine to start some sort of participant sort of study. Ideally 100% would be better. The point is, we don't want to go through this process of starting recording. We just want to leave it by, note what the serial number is. I mean, it's on the back of the sensor as well. But now this sensor is ready to be coupled. It's ready to take part in a study. So we don't need to do any starting of the recording. We just need to make sure that its firmware is up to date and that it's charged. Just on the note of the sensor manager, it's always good to visit our site occasionally and make sure that you have the very latest version of the sensor manager, because it will include firmware upgrades for the sensors so that we can make sure the sensors are operating at optimum levels, and especially when it comes to Bluetooth connectivity. So what's the next phase? So once you design your study, so we have a few algorithms which we'll touch on in a moment as well, but I just want to show you the ease of the process of actually preparing. So what we have is we go to the participants tab, and then we're going to add a participant. It's going to give us some options on to adding information for them, but the main thing is you're going to need the following materials, and we'll just cut to a video that Moritz has prepared for us. You can tell it's Moritz because his desk is really, really clean and orderly and organized. And as you can see, he's got the elements required for the study. His phone is open on the movisensXS app, and it's a simple case of scanning the QR code on the screen, and that will download all the necessary information. And a closer look at the actual smartphone perspective, this is the opening screen where you're going to scan the code to participate, couple with the study, download, and then start the actual study in the study management screen. That's going to then initiate two things. It will be first the informed consent, which you can edit in the study settings, and then it will be about permissions on the phone, which need to be granted in order to run the study effectively. After that point, you're going to couple the relevant sensor. So you need to make sure you know what sensor you're going to couple with the participant, because it will scan for all the sensors in the vicinity, and you can select a relevant one to make sure that the study is going to run effectively, and then it will validate the configuration of the study and that sensor. So if you're looking for EDA data, it needs to see that there's an EDA sensor. After that, it'll show you on the final home screen that the sensor is functioning, what sensor's connected, and it's currently up and running, and the battery life. So Moritz has basically set up a sedentary intervention study for himself where it'll detect when he's been seated or inactive, well, primarily in the seated position, for an hour, and then it will trigger an alarm for him, and we'll just demonstrate that now. So design-wise, it's very, very easy to implement. So depending on if you want it running the entire time, you would basically just set your sedentary block, or you could set it wherever you like within your sampling schema at a certain time values within a certain weekdays. And then just to configure, you just set the block for the number of minutes. And in this case, we've gone for 60 minutes of seated behavior. And then we want immediately after that 60 minutes has elapsed. So there will be times when you might want to do a delay. So if you're detecting that they're moving and they're actually in the midst of, say, some sort of exercise, you may not want to disturb that. You may want to set a delay or something to happen afterwards so that they have time to complete whatever task you're hoping that they'll complete. But in this case, we'll just set an alarm for him and then a form. And the form will simply display an intervention. So it's not that we won't be seeking to actually gather information from him. We're just purely telling him that he's been seated for 60 minutes and that he needs to get up and do some movement for his health. So we can hear that the alarm's gone, and he's wearing it at the hip, so it can actually be worn at the hip as well for seated detection. And it just lets him know, you've been sitting for 1 hour now, please get up and do some sort of intervention for your health, some sort of movement. And he's just going to do some squats for our amusement right now. So we're just going to touch on a couple more of the algorithms just before we go to a broader case study. And that is the inactivity or activity-inactivity monitor, which triggers when periods of activity and inactivity are detected. And it's actually really interesting. It's a nice adaptive threshold so that you're not getting too many triggers and you can really customize it. And this is detailed really nicely on our docs page. So if you need more information and you really need to work your way through this process, I highly recommend going to docs.movisens.com and looking at the sensor trigger scenarios. And some of the values we probably could, it needs tidying up, but we're getting there. But this particular activity-inactivity, you need at least the MOV3 or MOV4, but you can use it with any sensor. It just depends on the wear location. So it runs a filter, and it aggregates the movement over 10 minutes. It's got a rolling moving average, and then it can actually change and reconfigure its thresholds just so that it's actually not triggering too often. So it's quite an intelligent algorithm for capturing moments of activity and moments of inactivity with higher precision. Now, this algorithm is very old. It actually was utilized back in 2012, or actually even earlier, to gather data for this particular study, this particular paper from Uli Ebner-Prima et al. At the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology. And it's a fantastic paper that focuses on interactive multimodal ambulatory monitoring to investigate the association between physical activity and affect. And it's really good. It shows the process and the reason for developing it so that you can actually capture better correlations and better data. So rather than random stratification and triggering, more precise triggering based on the activity that's occurring, like triggering questionnaires based on when the actual event is happening, as opposed to just a fixed diary assessment of every 30 minutes or every 60 minutes or random throughout the day. It just shows that you can really gain some precision and better insights this way. So yeah, the interactive algorithm is we've been in this game for a while. That's all I'm trying to say, I guess. But highly recommended read, because it's one of the very early papers that deals with this topic. So check that out for your bedtime reading. Now, just clear that away. The simple RMSD algorithm is sort of a living nightmare for us, because it's really a very, very blunt tool that we recommend not using it, basically, but it was designed for someone in particular and utilized in their study, and in the interest of providing the capability of researchers to do any sort of replication that they want, it's still in here. It's still a part of the library, but we do not recommend using it. So we have a decreased RMSD algorithm, which is actually far more complex and far more customizable, and was developed once again for a particular study where it was trying to detect extended periods of decreased RMSD, so a lower heart rate variability, which is often a sign of a depressed parasympathetic system. So that could be from some sort of challenge or threat that's happening to you psychologically. But the key was it was isolating movement from the situation. So the idea was that when you're jogging up and down the stairs, yes, you will get decreased heart rate variability, but it won't actually trigger a questionnaire. And that was utilized and developed for this particular paper on prolonged non-metabolic heart rate variability reduction as a physiological marker of psychological stress in daily life by Bart Vakul and Vakul. Sorry if I'm saying your name wrong. I need to practice these things. And Julian Thayer. And this is also another very foundational paper that was published quite some time ago now. And there was a lot of... It explains the process and the development of the algorithm and its use and its ability to be kind of implemented in particular test cases. So highly recommended. And now finally, we're just going to touch on a little bit of a case study. So Lauren Bilsma at UPMC and Kristen Gainey, who was at Buffalo, I believe, but now is in the University of Western Australia, down in my home country. They're running a really interesting study where we've developed we've worked with them quite extensively to customize an algorithm that's an adaptive RMSD algorithm. So it's going to include times of stress from physical activity as well, but it's going to keep a limited number of times that they'll get surveys throughout the day, so it doesn't get too overwhelming. So it's running this really interesting sort of fine line, and they've really designed a great study here. So just to broaden out and see the level of complexity we have, they're running it based on sampling days. So it's not weekday or calendar dependent. It's sampling day one. From one, certain events occur. So they're going to actually get their participants to set specific times that they are to be sampled in. So like a 12-hour window throughout the day that they're comfortable that they'll be awake, wearing the sensor, and so on. So that can vary a lot between people, when they're getting up, especially during the current era of home office. I can vouch that there are some very interesting timeframes that are being worked by everyone. And then we have all these other elements that are happening on sampling days 2 to 11 here. So on sampling days 2 to 11, we've got a lot happening over here. We've got a set of random time questionnaires that are happening. And it's also adding mutable values to kind of limit the number that will actually be sent to the participant. And then in this particular time range, which if we go in here and look at this, I'll just go back up to normal size again. We have a default start and an end time, but we're actually looking at the time that they entered themselves. So the participants set their time as the time start and the time end, and we're looking at those values, those mutable values that they've set for us. So that's going to be different for every single participant, which is really, really handy. So during that time window, they're going to check that the number of actual questionnaires they get is a certain level, so event counter, and then look at the adaptive RMSD trigger, which is one that they've developed alongside us, and we've worked out a sort of, I guess, an ideal use case for their particular cohort. And we have sort of levels of physical activity cut points and consecutive RMSD values under the threshold, and we're just looking at all these different elements, and then if they actually hit, there'll be a slight time delay, changes the mutable value, and then bang, the alarm comes. So it comes after the event, so that there's some sort of time window of the event occurring, and you're not getting triggered during the actual event. And then they can also just elect to start their own survey if they want. So that's all happening on sampling days 2 to 11. And over here is kind of really cool as well. On sampling day 2 to 11, in this particular chain, we're looking at all the different elements of the sensor. So has the sensor stopped? Then we need to send them an alarm, letting them know that the recording has stopped. Is the battery low? We immediately want to tell them that the battery is low, but we don't want to be constantly telling them. So there's like a little delay there of 3,600 seconds, so that once they know that the battery is low, they're not just constantly getting pinged every minute until they charge it. But the alarm comes through and lets them know. If it's disconnected, then we need to let them know as well, and we can just let them know once. And they're also using HRVs valid for at least 5 minutes to determine that the sensor is actually being worn, or that it might need to be adjusted if there's some sort of issue with it. So this is a really, really cool study. It's implementing a lot of the functionality that we're talking about, and gathering a lot of very insightful sort of information that's very, very specific, that's going to allow them to hone in on the particular elements that they want to study and get the contextual information right at those times, like at the relevant times. So this is important to know, that we're open to listening to what you want as a researcher and customizing our tools and resources to help make that happen for you. So feel free to always get in touch if you have some sort of crazy idea of what you would like to do, or something that you're not sure if it can actually work or not, or that can it be implemented. I mean, feel free to keep firing away questions for the Q&A. But if it's something that you really want to dive deep with, then please get in touch with us, and we're more than happy to go through what is and isn't possible, and what it will take to make your study idea a reality. And now I guess we will move over to the Q&A section.